feels like farmers are protesting all over the world right now, at least in the EU. Now we're seeing the AP says they're erupting in India over guaranteed crop prices. I saw that this is a kind of an extension of farmer protests from a couple years ago, basically the same deal. And what it sounds like, no matter what farmer I'm talking to right now, is we don't make enough money to survive. That's what I'm hearing from people. So let's start in India right now. This headline says, police use tear gas against Indian farmers marching to New Delhi to demand guaranteed crop prices. What's going on?
Yeah, well, well, farmers worldwide are kind of at the bottom end of the pecking order. And I think India is probably more than anything, probably an extension, a pile on of what's happening in Europe. But essentially, farmers are aging, and aging farmers tend to not like to make changes. The older you get, the harder it is to make changes, because it takes a lot of energy to make changes. And unfortunately, in many areas, especially the EU and India, and to a lesser extent here in the US, farmers have become a dependency class on the government. In the EU, half of all farmers' income is direct government subsidy, direct government payments. In India, similar situation. And so what is it here?
Yeah.
Oh, here it's probably, I don't know, 10%. It's very, very low. And so the result is that that when there is a pinch, farmers don't look to doing other kinds of things. They simply protest to the government, because the government is writing their big paycheck. And so, the tragedy in my mind of this whole thing is that farmers have become so disempowered that they think their only power comes from the government. I mean, the most disempowering thing you can ever say is, well, I can't do this unless the government helps me. And that's got to be the most disempowering mindset in the world. And so, the cost, they're saying the cost of fertilizer is up. Well, then start composting. Don't buy Putin's fertilizer. I know it's high. I know it's expensive, but you don't have to use fertilizer. Many of us farmers, like us, don't use it. And when fertilizer went up 400% when Putin invaded Ukraine, we just laughed because we don't buy any of it. It didn't affect us at all. And so there are lots of solutions here, that farmers can do. But because so much of their income in these countries comes from the government, they immediately look to the government for salvation, rather than starting to, trying to do other things.
It's interesting as you scroll through this article, and one of the other articles that I read too talks about, just like you said, they want their prices to be raised by the government, so they double their income and waive their loans. And they say they will protest in New Delhi until their demands are met. I read another article that said that their problems, at least in part, are aggravated by the government incentivizing certain crops, and then there being too much of it. And so it's like, okay, well, there's like government incentivizes the behavior that caused the problem, and then you go back to the government to fix the problem so that you can have their solution. Doesn't seem like it makes a whole lot of sense. But in our country too, aren't we incentivized to grow corn, for instance, and then you get corn subsidies and then corn? So explain that. How does that work?
Yeah, well, in our country, we incentivize six things, and those six things are corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, cotton, and sugarcane. Those are the six things that we incentivize. And when the government intervenes in a marketplace like this, intervenes in a marketplace, it creates distortions and unrealistic things, and so that's exactly what it does in the U.S. I mean, that's why a Snickers bar is cheaper than a carrot. These incentives that artificially create price differentials. And so, yes, you're exactly right. The Indian, if these farmers around the world would take all the effort and the meetings and the haranguing and the angst and all that emotional energy and financial energy that they're putting into protesting, if they put all that into how to grow crops without chemicals, and composting and carbon centricity and pasturing animals outside with, electric fences and controlled grazing and integrated forest and diversified ecosystems and all the kind of creative things that we can do that actually, disentangle a farmer from nefarious agendas of other things, or the vulnerability, the risk, the vulnerability to geopolitical influences, as you said. If all that effort were put into that, it would be good. It's kind of like if somebody that makes their living, in crime, if they'd put as much energy into trying to make an honest living instead of trying to figure out how to be a criminal, most of them would do really well, because they're pretty sharp, and they got a lot of savvy. And so put your effort there. That's the tragedy in my view, that the farmers just feel helpless to fix their own situation, and that's the tragedy.
I have a question about that related to the Europe protest in a second. But tell me, do you know the average price right now in the grocery store if you go buy a gallon of milk, homogenized, ultra pasteurized, just like your typical milk? Any idea what it costs right now?
Oh man, I don't. I haven't bought. I've never bought milk in the store. I know what we pay for our herd share of raw milk, but in the grocery store, it's probably, I don't know what, a third. It's I don't know what, maybe $3 a gallon. I don't know. Do you know?
Yeah, Google is saying $3 in Florida, $6 in Hawaii, $3 in Idaho. So a lot of the dairy, the conventional dairy farmers that I know, and especially the ones that I knew when I was in the TV news business, and they were really, really like struggling financially. They would have the big trucks for Dairy Gold or whatever company show up and take all the milk. And they were constantly telling me how hard it was to stay in business as a dairy farmer. But if you like you said, if you drink raw and you're going direct with the farm, guess what I pay per gallon for raw goat milk? Take a guess.
Oh, take a guess. Well, we pay $9 for raw cow's milk, so I'm going to say you probably pay somewhere between maybe $16 a gallon, or maybe even as much as $18.
$16 a gallon.
$16. Yep. Okay. Hey, I won that. I won that round, didn't I? Yeah.
That's pretty good. But you could raise your prices because our cow milk is 12. So anyway, consider it.
Yeah. Well, cost of living comes in there, but yeah, your point is well taken, and that's where a lot of these, especially in the EU, I've been to Europe many times, talked to many farmers there, and the thing in the EU is, the EU spends $60 billion. 60, that's $60 billion a year. So imagine you're a farmer and half of your income every year doesn't come from what you produce. It comes from the government check that you receive. That's the way it is in the EU. And with that check come a host of regulations, lots and lots of regulations. You can do this, you can't do this, you can do this, if you want to do that, you have to get this license. If you want to do that, you got to get this license. And so what happens is you get these perverse incentives within the marketplace. For example, it is not uncommon. One of the reasons that all this in the EU started in the Netherlands, and I've been there many times, done seminars and things, talked to a lot of farmers. It's not uncommon in the Netherlands for a 10-acre farm to have 100 cow dairy. Now, Allison, you can't have 100 cows on 10 acres. That's 220,000 pounds of manure and urine per acre. And so the Netherlands,
10 acres and 2 cows, and they already drive us nuts.
Well, imagine 100 cows. I mean, just the stream of manure and urine. And so what happens? So the Netherlands has right now 4 times the nitrogen load of any other country in the EU. 4 times. and that nitrogen goes into the canals, and that makes a bunch of extra vegetation grow, willow trees and all this stuff, clogs up the canals. So now they got to pay more to clean the canals out. It makes the countryside smell like a toilet, and so while my heart is with farmers, I'm a farmer. My heart's with farmers. I get very frustrated with these farmers who are not taking care of the environment. They're not taking care of their nest. And this just like farmers here in the U.S. who do factory farming, and then they're complaining about the animal welfare folks. The Proposition 12 in California that said we're not gonna allow the sale of pork that's been ferreted in a gestation crate. Now the Iowa farmers are all mad. They're asking for federal government intervention and relief to make California's Proposition 12 illegal, or to circumvent it or exempt them or something. And the fact is that these gestation crates are so animal abusive that they're just like throwing gas on an animal rights fire. And if farmers had never done that in the first place, if there weren't 100 cow dairies on 10-acre farms, you can go down the list. If they hadn't done that, it wouldn't have created the kind of policy backlash we're seeing in the governments.
Wouldn't they say though that they're being forced into volume because of price? So I have to have 100 cows on my farm, because otherwise how am I supposed to make any money? I have to pay taxes and all these other things that I have to just play the volume game.
Well, on that 10-acre farm, instead of having 100 cows, you could have 20 cows, and you could have chickens and grow potatoes and carrots and have some grapevines. You could diversify and do a lot of different things that didn't overload the environment with the manure. And you got to realize that the subsidies, the milk subsidies, these farmers in the Netherlands, they get $1,000 a year, $1,000 per acre per year just for owning farmland. So think what that does to the price of farmland. If I'm going to get a check every year, $1,000 per acre from the government, just because I happen to own farmland, well, I can buy a bigger tractor. I can build a bigger barn. I can, I can do all sorts of things. And so, yeah, this is a complex thing. And unfortunately, who doesn't like a farmer? But I think the Spain ag minister from Spain, his name is Louis Plunas. He really hit the nail on the head. He said the bottom line for this whole thing is the farmers are feeling disrespected and underappreciated, and they're upset. And I think that's true kind of throughout the world. Is that farmers feel disrespected and underappreciated, and when and finally you say, I'm not going to take it anymore.
Mm. Yeah, but I don't know. That seems kind of, I get it, but it seems kind of emotional.
It is. Yeah, it is.
You know what I mean? Emotionally weak to do something like that. I mean, that if I said, you guys, what if I said to the people on, like in the YouTube comment section, you know what, screw you guys. I feel underappreciated. I'm not doing this anymore. I'll never have a business. So that's just a dumb way to run your business. But one thing I wanted to bring up to your point about riding that line between caring for the environment and then also being skeptical of, like, say, for instance, the government's regulations. When I cover these protests, it often, especially when I read the news about it, you do see kind of a false dichotomy, I think, in the coverage or the way even the alternative media covers it, because you'll have one where it never discusses that there are legitimate environmental concerns and food production concerns, the health of the people too, that are downstream of that. So they won't take that into account and then just rage against the government, or it'll be like all environment and not discussing it. So it makes it very difficult to, I think, have a reasonable conversation, because there are the people who really just want to hate the government. And it's like all the government's fault that the farmers are in this position, or there are the people that, just like love the environment and don't necessarily see how regulations and whatnot have gotten us into a particular situation. So how do you How are you not like the most hated guy on the face of the earth, I guess, when you try to discuss this in the
Yeah.
way that you do?
Yeah. So what I do is I just point out that both sides have their problems. Now the farmers hate it when I don't just say that it's not all the government's fault. And of course the environmentalists hate it when I'm not willing to say it's all that it's not all the farmers' fault. And so the fact is that um, both sides are in a problem. If you live in the country in the Netherlands, who wants their area to smell like a toilet? And when I was there the last time, they were actually dehydrating all this manure and sending it back in the ships that brought the grain from Uruguay, to the Netherlands to ship it back to Uruguay as fertilizer. That's an incredibly unsustainable and expensive way to try to do business. So I think what's happened, Allison, is here lately is that that farmers are kind of on the bottom of the pecking order, and as a result, when socialist governments encounter financial stress, the war in Ukraine, COVID lockdowns, all those kinds of things, when they encounter those kinds of stresses, they're desperate to cut something. I mean, the EU is trying to send weapons to Ukraine. They've got an immigrant. Their social services are overrun with other things, and so the easy scapegoat, the easy whipping boy, if you will, of all things, including in the U.S., is well, let's see where we can cut money to the farmer. Let's see where we can cut the farmer's things. And that's where I'm saying this disrespected and underappreciated. They could cut money to all sorts of social services, all sorts of things, but they don't. They're looking at the farmer to be the first one to cut. And that's where the farmers feel unappreciated. But if they would, if in the EU, I don't know what the situation is in India as far as food regulations and that sort of thing. I expect India is fairly open, but in the EU, I can tell you it is very difficult for a farmer to be able to sell to a neighbor without a whole bunch of regulatory requirements. And it's getting that way in the U.S. It's close. It's a little bit worse in the EU. Not quite as bad here, but close. And so if farmers, I'm looking at these tractors in these tractor cage. We've got a fairly significant farm. We've got 8 or 9 tractors. We don't have anything as big as these tractors I'm seeing. These guys and you go down the, in Austria, Germany, I'm going to be back there doing seminars this summer, and they don't have any animals outside. They're all in confinement, and they all use these great big machines to harvest everything and bring it into the animals rather than letting the animals, self-harvest and be outside. There are tons of more ecological and cost-cutting options for these farmers. But most of them are 60 years old. They've done their duty, and they don't want to change. And so it's easier to go dump poop at the Parliament steps than it is to actually put the poop in a compost pile and use it instead of buying chemical fertilizer. Then they complain about the price of chemical fertilizer. So it's a very, very complex thing. But trust me, the farmers are complicit in it, and they're not helpless. That's the main thing. They're not helpless.
All right, Joel, I'm going to throw a comment at you, but think on it for a second because I got to tell people about wine. The struggle for farmers in my area is the markup between sale of livestock and the sale of the finished product in the grocery store. All right, so we'll take that. Ollie Loving says those Indian farmers could use some high altitude wine. Yes, they could. If you feel bad for them, unlike Joel, who doesn't feel bad for them, but you do, you want to send them some wine so they'll feel better about their plight. They're spending a lot of time outside right now protesting the government. They could use a good glass of wine. Which ships them over to New Delhi. Go to AllisonWinePromo.com. These are extremist altitude wines. They come from between 6,000 and 9,000 feet, very remote regions of Argentina. They are working so hard for your palate, these grapes, under the sun out there. Fewer pesticides, natural fermentation and filtration, all the good stuff. Hand-picked grapes, family farms, 200-plus-year-old vineyards. Why would you want to get this somewhere else? You want to be an extremist? You're still wearing flannel pajamas. That's okay. You haven't left your grandma's basement. We're not going to judge you here. You can be an extremist and not go to federal prison by going to AllisonWinePromo.com. So thanks to everybody who is part of the Allison Wine Club. Really appreciate it. Going back over to that question, Joel, about the markup and this direct, I think this person may have just not been able to finish the comment, but this is like direct marketing or direct to consumer. Yeah. What is the difficulty? Is it naive of somebody like me to assume that everybody could do what you do, or what my goat farmer does? Is that naive of me to think that everybody could eventually charge $16 a gallon for milk and live in a nice part of Florida as a farmer and not have to sacrifice lifestyle necessarily? My animals are useless, so I will definitely be sacrificing.
That's a really baited question. So I'll just take the bait and say, yes, you are naive. Yeah. So let's unpack that just a little bit I'll be clear here. In the perfect world, theoretically, yes, every farmer could do what we do. That's right. But practically speaking, it becomes difficult. I mean, you've got cities, you've got, very rural areas, Idaho, Wyoming, if it's 100 miles to a Coke machine, and I'm not promoting Coke, all right, but if it's 100 miles to a Coke machine or a gas station, it's really hard to direct market. And fortunately, now we have distribution. UPS and FedEx has really knocked the option, opened the option for farmers like me to access, national market, doorstep, door-to-door delivery. We do that. We now, sell nationwide. And market nationwide. And that's just, escalating, especially in the cities where people don't want to walk outside and go to the grocery store because they might lose their car to a carjacker and get mugged, on their way. So they'd rather just furtively, grab that box from the front step and take it in, and we're good to go. Interestingly, Allison, in the last year, we started shipping eggs, and I thought, what, ship eggs? Really crazy? We can ship eggs to Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. We can ship eggs and cheaper than they can buy them at farmers market. Because when you defund the police, you raise your taxes and you increase bureaucrats up the wazoo, the cost of doing business is extremely expensive. And so in a place where we live, where it's very conservative, low crime, low taxes, it's a throwback to the, 1900. We can produce things very, very cheaply because we don't have all those externalized business costs. So what's happened is that as the food system has centralized and become more and more centralized, four companies now control 85% of America's meat sales. Just think of that. 4 companies control 85% of America's meat sales. When that happens, market competition starts to dissipate, and individual farmers that are dependent on that system, they're on the end of that whip, end of that rope. And so they get pushed back in that system. And so one way to break out of it is to direct market, just like your goat milk supplier, the people at farmers markets, or the people that are direct marketing, people like us who do direct market. And fortunately, there are a lot of aids now. There are internet geeks that are coming on with great platforms to help us, have a website and a shopping cart and all that. And distribution has become much easier. And so the globalist technology that the globalists developed for globalism can now be pinched, and we can now pirate that for a new localization system. I mean, I'm thinking, goodness, 40 years ago, our newsletter went out by snail mail, on a typewriter, snail mail, Now we can automatically stick in, 1,000, 2,000 email addresses, and I can be out, moving the cows while the computer automatically sends out 2,000 emails. That is what I call co-opting globalist technology to reinvigorate a local or a direct market approach. So So there are all sorts of collaboratives that are developing now. And so yes, I'm a big believer that farmers need to become entrepreneurs and actually get, aggressive about wearing all the hats of the distributor, the processor, and the marketer, in addition to being the producer. And the more people do that, the more chances there is of weaning yourself off, becoming disentangled of the system.
Okay, and since we're talking about your business, polyfacefarms.com, you can go shop there. And Joel also has a blog, thelunaticfarmer.com, so you can read his blog, but the website, the Polyface Farm website, has the links there. But that's where you can shop for his eggs. If you're watching and you want to send some mail, you don't want to use your credit card, you're paranoid about that stuff, you can go to my P.O. Box, send mail to my P.O. Box, 3355 Denellen, Florida, 34432. Nancy, I'm not going to hold up your letter because it has your address on it. Nancy Hall. Yes, I got your letter. Thank you for sending me a return note so I could send you a return letter. I will do it. She sent me an envelope that is already pre-addressed to her. Nancy Hall. I did get your letter. Thank you so much. Okay, Joel, any final thoughts before you go? I really appreciate you taking the time.
No, I'd say the final little soundbite for you is as we approach this time of desired disentanglement, I would say that the new 401k plan is to live close to people who know how to grow things, fix things, and build things. That's the new 401k plan.